Well, now, let me tell you about a man named Andrew Walker. Andrew was the kind of guy who didn't just own a room, he rented it out, remodeled it, and then stood right in the center demanding everyone admire the wallpaper. He was a millionaire, or at least he had been. The problem with Andrew was that his fortune had gotten a little philosophical. It existed more in theory, in the headlines of 5 years ago, and in the sheer, blinding volume of his current spending than it did in the bank statements he was currently ignoring. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight was a performance. They were at the Metropolitan Room, an absolute fortress of exclusivity downtown. If you're enjoying this story about wealth, ego, and the price of appearances, hit that like button now. Trust me, you'll want to see where this is going. And don't forget to subscribe, because we're diving deep into stories that reveal what really happens behind closed doors. The kind of place where the waiters wear tuxedos better than most wedding guests, and the lighting is specifically designed to make wealthy people look 10 years younger and twice as wise. It was a massive charity gala, one of those events where half the money goes to a good cause and the other half goes into maintaining the self-esteem of the donors. Andrew was hosting a table of 4, his 2 business associates, Robert and Sarah, and his daughter, Lily Walker. Andrew, 50-something, tanned year-round, wore a bespoke dark suit that probably cost more than Noah Green, the waiter serving their table, made in 6 months. He was sitting back, one arm draped casually over the empty chair beside him, projecting an aura of effortless dominance. "The key to true success, Robert," Andrew was saying, his voice just loud enough to carry past their table's floral centerpiece, his visibility. "People need to see you winning. They need to see the commitment."
Robert, a man whose cautious nature was visible in the way he sipped his expensive Cabernet, nodded slowly. "Absolutely, Andrew. This charity initiative you're backing, it's impressive." "It's necessary," Andrew corrected, waving a hand dismissively, as if swatting away a compliment that was far too small for him. "The world needs leaders who can step up. And frankly, it's good business. Shows liquidity, shows stability. I told Sarah earlier, perception is reality in this market." Sarah, sharp, mid-30s, and wearing a dress that screamed power lunch, gave Andrew a knowing smile. She'd worked with Andrew long enough to recognize the subtle shift in his tone from confidence to sheer bravado. But she played along. Andrew was still holding the keys to several very large, if increasingly shaky, deals she needed finalized. "It certainly solidifies your position, Andrew," Sarah agreed. "Everyone here tonight knows who's covering the big tables." That was the fuel Andrew needed. He beamed. He had specifically ordered the most expensive tasting menu they offered, insisting on pairing wines for every course, even though Robert had confessed he was driving later. "Lily, darling, aren't you going to try that scallop?" Andrew asked, turning his attention to his daughter. Lily Walker, 22, was the quietest person at the table. She had her father's sharp intelligence, but none of his desperate need for fanfare. She was dressed elegantly, but she wore her clothes like a uniform, not a costume. She hated these dinners. She hated how her father used generosity as a weapon. "It's wonderful, Dad," Lily said, cutting into the perfectly seared scallop. She didn't look up immediately. She was watching her father's eyes. They weren't focused on the food, or even the associates. They were darting around the room, checking who was looking at him. The main course arrived shortly after. It was a spectacle. Australian Wagyu beef, served under silver domes that were lifted in synchronized motion by 3 waiters. The aroma was rich, smoky, and utterly luxurious. Andrew took a deep, theatrical breath. "Now that is quality. Robert, you must try this. This is what we're talking about when we talk about investing in the best." As Andrew launched into a 10-minute monologue about a real estate deal in Miami that was about to explode, a deal that, unbeknownst to his associates, was currently hemorrhaging cash, Noah Green, the waiter responsible for the Walker table, felt his palms sweating. Noah was 24, trying to put himself through night classes and constantly battling the looming specter of overdue bills. He knew the difference between the wealthy people who came here to enjoy themselves and the ones like Andrew who came here to prove something. Andrew was a demanding host, insisting the water glasses be refilled exactly 3/4 full and sending back the first bottle of wine because the cork smelled slightly timid. While Andrew was talking about projected returns, Noah's mind was stuck on the rent notice taped to his fridge back in his tiny Brooklyn apartment. It was 5 days overdue.
He knew that feeling of the pit in your stomach when the timeline runs out. He watched Andrew laugh, a big, booming, manufactured sound, and thought, must be nice to worry about timid corks instead of eviction. The dinner dragged on, glittering and performative. Andrew covered everything from his golf handicap, still beating the pros, what can I say, to his plans for expanding his philanthropic foundation. We're talking 8 figures by Q3, easily. Every number he spoke was designed to be large, reassuring, and completely untraceable. Lily mostly listened, picking at her food. She knew the truth, or at least parts of it. She had seen the frantic late-night calls, the sudden sales of non-essential assets, like the family boat, which Andrew had claimed was just too much hassle to maintain. But she didn't know the scale of the trouble. Andrew was a master of compartmentalization, especially when it came to his own daughter. The Wagyu plates were cleared. It was 9:45 p.m. The noise level in the Metropolitan Room was hitting its peak, a low, contented roar of money and influence. Now came the moment Andrew truly loved, the grand finale. Dessert and the subsequent moment when he would casually sign the check, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that tonight's extravagance was merely pocket change. "Well," Andrew said, leaning back, patting his flat stomach. "That was spectacular. Noah, please tell the chef my compliments. And we are ready for the dessert menu. I believe we have the chocolate lava cake and the champagne sorbet coming up." Noah nodded, collecting the final stray fork. "Yes, Mr. Walker, I'll let the kitchen know." He disappeared toward the service station, where the head waiter, a stern woman named Maria, was organizing the flow of checks and credit card folios. This is where the universe, or maybe just a clumsy logistics person, decided to intervene. Earlier that afternoon, a courier had arrived at the Metropolitan Room's administrative office with a sealed, heavy envelope addressed to Andrew Walker, marked urgent and confidential. It was far too important, the courier had insisted, to wait until the morning. The office manager, knowing Andrew was dining there tonight and often settled business matters late, had decided to slip the envelope to Maria, instructing her to ensure it was delivered to Mr. Walker discreetly before he departed. Maria, however, was in the middle of a rush. She had a stack of leather check folios waiting for delivery, and the envelope, stiff and cream-colored, was sitting right next to them. In the hasty, high-pressure environment of the service station, Maria had simply slipped the envelope into the folio that was designated for Andrew Walker's table, assuming Andrew had requested it earlier. She intended to pull it out when she handed the folio to Noah, but the dessert rush hit hard. She slapped the leather folio into Noah's hands. "Table 14, Walker, dessert menu is being prepped, just confirming the order." Noah, focused on the immediate task of getting the dessert order confirmed and moving on to his next table, didn't notice the extra bulk inside the leather folder. He didn't look at the paper inside. He only saw the expensive leather container that held the final transaction. He walked back to table 14, his expression neutral. "Dessert is coming right up, Mr. Walker," Noah announced. He placed the heavy black leather folio, the one usually reserved for the check, right next to Andrew's left hand. Andrew glanced down at the folio, a small, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. Perfect timing. This was the moment of quiet power, the proof that the whole night was on his tab. "Thank you, Noah," Andrew said, his voice smooth and slightly patronizing. "You've been excellent tonight." Noah gave a quick professional nod and retreated a few steps, standing ready to assist, but keeping his distance. Andrew let the folio sit there for a moment. He wanted his associates, Robert and Sarah, to see it. He wanted them to register the implicit message. I pay for everything. I control everything. "So, Robert, back to the Cayman structure," Andrew began, but his eyes were already drifting toward the leather folder.
He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing the fine grain of the leather. He opened it, expecting to see the bill, perhaps a small card listing the charitable donation amount, and the credit card slip waiting for his signature. Instead, he saw 2 things. His Platinum American Express card, still unused, lying neatly inside the fold. And next to it, a large, thick, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't the thin, casual kind of envelope used for a tip receipt. This was formal. It felt official, heavy with important paper. Andrew paused. His hand hesitated. "Ah," he murmured, picking up the envelope. "Looks like the office manager caught me. Probably some urgent paperwork for the foundation."
He wanted to project that this was just another high-stakes business detail managed effortlessly between courses. He wanted to look busy, important. He flipped the envelope over. It was sealed with a wax-like stamp, and the return address was printed in sharp, cold black lettering. It wasn't the logo of his foundation. It wasn't his law firm. The header read, Bainbridge and Thorne, LLC, Specialized Asset Resolution. Andrew's heart, which had been beating with the comfortable rhythm of self-admiration, stumbled. Now, before I reveal what's in that envelope, and trust me, it's devastating, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. This story takes a turn that'll make you rethink everything about success and money. Bainbridge and Thorne, he knew that name. He knew it very well. They were not pleasant people. They were the ones hired when things got truly ugly, when polite phone calls turned into legal threats. He had been avoiding calls from Bainbridge and Thorne for 3 weeks. He glanced up quickly, searching the room. No one was looking at him, not really. Robert was chatting with Sarah about the wine. Lily was focused on her water glass. Noah was watching the kitchen door. Andrew needed to maintain the illusion. He needed to be casual. He tapped the envelope lightly on the table, a sound lost in the general hum of the room. "Well, let's see what chaos they've conjured up now," Andrew said, forcing a chuckle that sounded brittle, even to his own ears. He tore the seal with a practiced motion, pulling out the folded document inside. It was thick, legal-sized paper, stamped and dated that very afternoon. The ink smelled faintly of a copier machine. As he unfolded the document, the light from the chandelier above the table hit the header. It was bold, all caps, demanding attention. Notice of accelerated indebtedness and demand for immediate repayment. The air suddenly seemed to thicken around Andrew. He felt the familiar cold panic that had been lurking just beneath his expensive suit jacket finally break through the surface. He didn't need to read the legalese. He saw the key phrases instantly: material breach, violation of Covenant C4, and immediate repayment in full required. But what truly landed the blow, what hit him like a physical punch, were the numbers, clearly itemized in bold black digits. The document listed the principal amount, accrued interest, penalties, and collection fees. The total was not a theoretical number or a future projection. It was real, it was present, and it was devastatingly large. It was a number that erased any pretense of liquidity he had been boasting about all evening. Andrew's eyes scanned quickly down the page, his face growing paler under the warm restaurant lighting. He saw the final figure, the sum total of everything he owed, demanding to be paid within 48 hours. He froze, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. Robert, mid-sentence about the future of global supply chains, noticed the sudden stillness. He paused, lifting his wine glass to his lips, waiting for Andrew to finish his urgent business. Sarah noticed it too. She saw the way Andrew's eyes darted back and forth across the page, not reading, but consuming the shock. And then there was Lily. Lily, who was sitting directly across from him, had not been talking. She had been observing. The document was unfolded facing her father, but the large, bold font of the final tally was angled perfectly for her to read. She didn't have time to process the meaning of acceleration, but she absolutely registered the string of digits, the commas, and the dollar sign. It was a number that stretched across half the page. And it was followed by a chilling, simple phrase: balance overdue. Andrew felt the blood drain from his head. This wasn't supposed to happen here. This was his sanctuary, his stage. His card was lying there, unused, ready to prove his solvency, and instead, this piece of paper was screaming the truth. He slammed the document shut, folding it quickly and violently, stuffing it back into the envelope before anyone could see the full extent of the damage. The movement was sharp, breaking the effortless calm he had maintained all night. Across the room near the service station, Noah Green had turned to look at the table, checking if they needed anything before the desserts arrived. He saw Andrew's sudden, jerky movement. More importantly, he saw the corner of the envelope before Andrew tucked it away. Noah recognized the letterhead, Bainbridge and Thorne. He knew them from his own life, from the intimidating, official-looking letters that had arrived regarding his student loans last year. They didn't send urgent, hand-delivered letters for small sums. They only dealt with catastrophe. Noah's heart gave a strange thump. He looked at the impeccably dressed millionaire, the man who had complained about the timid Cork, and realized that Andrew Walker was in deep, terrifying trouble. Noah knew what that look of trapped desperation felt like, even if Andrew's debt was hundreds of thousands of times larger than his own. He said nothing. He just watched. Andrew cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound.
"Well," he said, trying to force the big, booming voice back. It came out thin. "Just some standard administrative nonsense. You know how it is." He picked up the leather folio again, placing the debt notice underneath it. He looked up at Noah, who was still hovering nearby. "Noah," Andrew said, the word clipped. "The dessert. I think we'll skip it tonight. Too much food, you know?" He didn't look at Lily. He didn't look at Robert or Sarah. He was staring straight through the waiter. Noah, recognizing the sudden sharp shift in the atmosphere, simply nodded, his face unreadable. "Of course, Mr. Walker. I'll cancel the order." Dessert was canceled. The carefully orchestrated evening had just hit a wall. If you're thinking, wow, this is intense, drop a comment below telling me what you would do in Andrew's situation. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button. We're just getting started. Robert put down his wineglass, the clink of crystal against the marble table seeming incredibly loud. "Skip dessert?" Robert asked, genuinely surprised. "Andrew, you were raving about the chocolate cake." "Just running late," Andrew muttered, picking up the folio again. He was fumbling slightly. The casual conversation did not resume. The energy had been sucked out of the table, replaced by a dense, awkward silence. The illusion had been momentarily shattered, leaving behind the cold reality of a legal document. Andrew Walker, the benefactor, the man of visibility and liquidity, had just folded the evidence of his ruin and placed it next to the bill he still hadn't paid. The performance was over, and the audience was waiting to see what the final, disastrous act would be. The performance was over, but the stage lights were still glaring. Andrew Walker, the man who had just minutes ago been a titan of industry discussing 8-figure philanthropic goals, was now just a sweating middle-aged man holding a piece of paper that spelled utter financial doom. He had folded the notice of debt acceleration so tightly that the creases were white. He tried to slide the envelope into the inside pocket of his expensive jacket, but his hand was shaking too much and the paper was too stiff. He ended up just stuffing the whole leather folio back onto the table, covering the terrible truth with the bill he still needed to settle. The silence at table 14 was no longer the comfortable, expectant quiet of people waiting for dessert. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a room where a bomb has just failed to explode, but everyone knows the fuse is still burning. Robert, ever the pragmatist, was the first to speak, his voice low and laced with forced concern. "Andrew, is everything all right? That looked official?" Andrew blinked, trying desperately to recall the persona he had been wearing moments before. The dominant, dismissive patriarch. "Official?" Andrew scoffed, though the sound was watery. "Oh, absolutely. Just some unexpected logistical nightmare with the Miami deal. Legal paperwork, you know. They always wait until the worst possible time to demand signatures." He laughed again, that brittle, manufactured sound. But this time, Robert didn't nod. Robert just looked at him, his brow furrowed. Robert knew legal paperwork. Legal paperwork usually came via email or FedEx the next morning, not hand-delivered to a charity dinner in a check folio. Sarah, leaning forward slightly, watched Andrew's face. She didn't look at the folio. She looked at the tiny bead of sweat that had just tracked down Andrew's temple. Sarah was smart enough to know that a man who was truly in control of a massive real estate deal wouldn't be sweating over a signature in the middle of a $500 a plate dinner.
"Miami is heating up, then," Sarah prompted, trying to give him an out, a path back to the narrative. "Heating up," Andrew repeated, latching onto the phrase like a drowning man grabbing driftwood. "Yes, extremely hot. Requires my immediate attention. I am afraid I'm going to have to depart early." He looked around the table, forcing eye contact. "I apologize, Robert, Sarah, but this is urgent, time-sensitive. You understand how these things are."
He was scrambling for the exit, but he hadn't paid the bill yet. The credit card, the Platinum American Express that symbolized his status, was still lying inside the folio, next to the debt notice. He needed to complete the transaction. The final act of the evening had to be the casual swipe of the card and the grand signature. If he left without paying, the whole evening would be a failure. Andrew picked up the folio again and signaled to Noah, who was still standing near the service station, pretending to organize menus, but watching table 14 with unnerving attention. Noah walked over, his face polite but expressionless. He had seen the paper, he knew the name Bainbridge and Thorne, and he was watching the millionaire implode in slow motion. "Noah," Andrew said, his voice regaining a fraction of his former arrogance, "we need to settle up immediately. Just for what we've had, I'm afraid business calls." "Certainly, Mr. Walker," Noah replied smoothly. He reached for the folio. Andrew hesitated. He didn't want Noah to see the contents. He quickly pulled out his credit card, the platinum card that felt suddenly flimsy and insignificant, and slid the debt notice envelope deeper into the folio's inner pocket. He handed the leather folder, now containing only the bill and the card, to Noah. "Just the tab for the wine and the mains," Andrew instructed, trying to sound impatient rather than desperate. "And please, make sure the donation for the charity is processed separately. I'll ensure the foundation wires that tomorrow morning." The donation, the massive, visible commitment he had boasted about. He couldn't pay it tonight. The accelerated debt notice had just confirmed that every liquid asset he possessed was now effectively frozen or claimed. But he couldn't admit that. He had to promise it for tomorrow. Noah nodded, accepting the folio. As he walked away toward the payment terminal, Andrew felt a cold wave wash over him. Would the card even work? It was a terrifying thought. He had been so focused on maintaining the cash flow illusion through public spending that he hadn't kept track of every account. If the main account linked to the platinum card had been flagged by Bainbridge and Thorne, or if the underlying collateral had been seized, the card would decline, right here, in front of Robert and Sarah. The irony was crushing. He was facing ruin over millions, yet the immediate paralyzing fear was over a $1,500 restaurant tab. Andrew sat back, trying to appear relaxed, crossing his legs, but his foot tapped incessantly under the table. Robert and Sarah began a muted conversation, deliberately ignoring detention, discussing the merits of a new bond fund, but their eyes kept flicking to the service station, watching Noah. They weren't focused on the bond fund, they were focused on the outcome of the transaction. If Andrew's card failed, their business relationship was over before the coffee cooled. Lily, however, was not pretending. She was looking right at her father, her expression a mix of pity and profound disappointment. "Dad," she said quietly, cutting through the low hum of the associate's conversation. Andrew flinched, turning toward her. "Yes, darling. We'll talk in the car. It's been a long night."
"You said you were backing this charity initiative because the world needs leaders who step up," Lily observed, her voice clear and precise. "Is that what this was? Stepping up?" Andrew felt a spike of anger, instantly followed by guilt. "Lily, don't start. This is not the time or the place for a philosophical discussion." "But it is the place," she insisted, her gaze unwavering. "You brought us here to show Robert and Sarah that you were successful, that you were paying for everything, that you were bigger than everyone else." She paused, then lowered her voice further. "And then that letter arrived." She hadn't mentioned the number, but Andrew knew she had seen the total. The raw, devastating total. "That letter," Andrew hissed, leaning in, "was a clerical error, nothing more. A misunderstanding that will be resolved by lunch tomorrow." "But it came tonight," Lily countered, her voice gentle but firm. "It came right before the dessert you insisted on buying, and it made you cancel everything and run." She wasn't accusing him of being poor. She was accusing him of being a fraud. Andrew had no defense. He looked away, his jaw tight. He hated that she saw this. He had spent 20 years building this glittering shell, and in one swift, cruel delivery, it had been cracked open by a collection agency and witnessed by his own daughter. Meanwhile, Noah had reached the POS terminal. He glanced at the American Express Platinum card, then at the bill, $1,487.50, including the expensive Wagyu and the paired wines. He swiped the card. He held his breath. A moment passed. The machine whirred. Approved. Noah felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment.
Relief because a declined transaction meant a huge scene, possibly involving Maria and the manager and disrupting the entire floor. Disappointment because for a brief, fleeting moment, he had seen the mighty Andrew Walker brought to his knees. And now, the pretense held. Andrew was still rich enough to cover the dinner. He printed the receipt and tucked the card back into the folio. He walked back to table 14 with the practiced slow movement of a man delivering good news. "Here you are, Mr. Walker," Noah said, placing the folio in front of Andrew. "Everything is settled." Andrew visibly slumped with relief. The card had worked. The immediate humiliation was averted. He picked up the pen, his hand still unsteady. He signed the receipt with a flourish, making sure the associates saw the confident signature, masking the sheer terror he felt. He pulled out his wallet. He still had a thick wad of cash, hundreds mostly, for small, visible expenses like tips. He peeled off $500 bills and placed them on the table next to the signed receipt. "That's for you, Noah," Andrew announced, loud enough for the neighboring tables to potentially hear. He wanted one final, undeniable display of wealth. $500 for a waiter was a statement. "Excellent service tonight. Truly top-notch." Noah looked at the bills. $500. That was nearly a third of his monthly rent. This is the moment where everything shifts. Comment below if you're Team Noah or Team Andrew. And if you're loving these real, raw stories about money and life, subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss one. He felt a sharp, bitter pang of irony. This man, who was hours away from losing millions, was throwing away half a week's wages to maintain an image for people who already knew he was lying.
"Thank you, Mr. Walker," Noah said, accepting the cash, his voice completely flat. He knew the money was cheap, bought with borrowed liquidity. Andrew stood up abruptly, scraping his chair back against the marble floor, a loud, grating sound that drew the attention of several nearby tables. "Robert, Sarah," Andrew said, not meeting their eyes, already moving. "My sincerest apologies for the abrupt departure. We'll finalize the Q3 projections tomorrow morning. Early start. I have an early flight to catch." He didn't have an early flight. He had 48 hours to find a miracle to cover the accelerated debt. Robert and Sarah stood up with him, their movements polite but hurried. They exchanged a look that Andrew didn't miss, a look that said, "We need to review his balance sheets first thing." The damage was done. They had seen the crack. Andrew took the leather folio, the one containing the signed receipt and the horrifying debt notice, and tucked it aggressively under his arm. He didn't want to leave it behind. It was now the most important and most dangerous piece of paper he owned. "Come on, Lily," he commanded, moving toward the exit. Lily stood slowly. She looked briefly at Robert and Sarah. "Good night," she murmured. She didn't follow her father immediately. She walked past the table, her eyes falling on the empty space where the envelope had rested. She remembered the number. It was burned into her memory. Andrew Walker strode quickly across the metropolitan room, Lily trailing a few steps behind him. His walk was still powerful, his shoulders back, but he was moving too fast. He looked like a general retreating from a disastrous battle, trying to maintain the appearance of a strategic withdrawal. As they passed the next table, where a group of younger, louder financiers were roaring with laughter over an investment anecdote, nobody turned their heads. Nobody congratulated Andrew on his generosity. He was just another suit leaving the room. The performance was over, and the audience had already moved on to the next act. They reached the heavy, ornate doors of the restaurant. Andrew pushed them open with unnecessary force, stepping out onto the cold stone steps of the building. The air outside was sharp and cool, a stark contrast to the perfumed warmth of the gala inside. Quick reminder, if this story is keeping you hooked, share it with someone who needs to hear this lesson about money and ego. And stick around, because the next 48 hours of Andrew's life are absolutely brutal. Andrew pulled out his phone, already dialing his long-suffering chief financial officer, Mark. "Get the car," Andrew barked into the phone, ignoring the fact that his driver was probably already waiting. He needed to hear the sound of his own authority. "And Mark, listen to me. I need every liquid asset identified. Every single one. Bainbridge and Thorne just accelerated the note. The entire balance. We have 2 days." He hung up before Mark could respond, shoving the phone back into his pocket.
Lily stood beside him, buttoning her coat. The sounds of the city, the distant sirens, the whoosh of traffic, seemed loud and uncaring. "Where are we going, Dad?" she asked. "Home," Andrew snapped. "We're going home to figure out how to stop this. This is a hostile takeover, Lily, a strategic maneuver. They want to scare me into settling." "Is it really just a scare tactic?" Lily asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "When they know you don't have that kind of cash sitting around?" Andrew turned on her, his face contorted in a mask of stress and fading fury. "I don't need your cynicism right now, Lily. I need support. I need people to believe in me."
"I believe the number I saw," she said simply. "That wasn't a scare tactic, Dad. That was the end of the line." Andrew winced as if she had struck him. He looked down the street, straining to see the headlights of his black sedan. The denial he had maintained for months, the comfortable lie that his visible spending equaled invisible wealth, was finally crumbling under the weight of his daughter's clear-eyed assessment. He had spent all night proving he was solvent, yet the proof of his ruin had been delivered right to his plate. The driver pulled up silently. Andrew yanked the back door open. "Get in," he ordered. As they sped away from the Metropolitan Room, Andrew was already back on the phone, his voice a frantic, low murmur, trying to conjure a solution out of thin air. He was talking about selling the Hamptons house, about calling a desperate favor from an old rival, about leverage and collateral. Lily sat next to him, staring out the window at the glittering, indifferent skyline of the city. She didn't interrupt. She was no longer worried about her father's reputation. She was worried about their future. The comfortable, extravagant life she had known was now revealed as a fragile, expensive illusion. Meanwhile, back inside the Metropolitan Room, Noah Green finished clearing table 14. He stacked the crystal wine glasses, carefully wiped the dark stain of spilled Cabernet, and pocketed the $500. He walked back to the service station, where Maria was counting out tips for the night. "Walker table settled?" Maria asked, not looking up. "Yes," Noah confirmed. "Paid for drinks and mains, canceled dessert, left a substantial cash tip." Maria raised an eyebrow, noting the high tip amount. Generous, even when rushing out. "Very generous," Noah agreed, folding the bills neatly into his apron pocket. He didn't mention the Bainbridge and Thorne letter. He didn't mention the look of sheer terror he had seen in Andrew Walker's eyes. That was his secret. He looked at the cash. This tip covered his overdue rent, with enough left over for groceries and tuition for the next 2 weeks. Andrew Walker's frantic final act of performance had just saved Noah Green from his own small-scale financial disaster. The irony was not lost on Noah. The millionaire's ruin had bought him a reprieve. He knew what Andrew Walker was facing now, the endless, agonizing calls and the search for funds that weren't there. Noah had been there, on a scale 1,000 times smaller. He glanced toward the door Andrew had just burst through. "Good luck, Mr. Walker," he thought without pity. "You're gonna need it." Noah picked up a fresh linen napkin and a silver tray. The night was still young for the truly solvent patrons. He had 2 more tables to serve before closing, and he needed to focus. The world outside the restaurant was collapsing for Andrew Walker, but inside, the high-stakes performance of wealth continued, course by expensive course. Andrew's world, however, was now confined to the back seat of his sedan, moving rapidly toward a confrontation he could no longer postpone. They arrived at the penthouse apartment, a monument of glass and steel overlooking Central Park, purchased during the peak of Andrew's true success. It was the ultimate status symbol, and it was likely the first asset Bainbridge and Thorne would target. As Andrew burst through the polished marble foyer, he was met by Mark, his chief financial officer, a man who looked permanently exhausted. Mark had been waiting, having received Andrew's panicked call moments earlier.
"Andrew, thank God you're home," Mark said, holding a stack of files. "I've been reviewing the correspondence. We can't ignore this. The acceleration notice is legitimate. They are demanding immediate repayment of the $18 million bridge loan, plus penalties. Total is approaching $19.5 million. Andrew paced the length of the living room carpet, his bespoke suit suddenly feeling tight and itchy. $19.5 million, Andrew repeated, the number heavy and real in the quiet apartment. That's impossible. We have assets. We have the Miami collateral. We have the foundation holdings. The Miami collateral is underwater, Mark said gently but firmly. And the foundation is legally separate. You know that. We can't touch that without massive regulatory issues. Bainbridge and Thorne know exactly what they're doing. They targeted the non-collateralized bridge loan first because they know we don't have the liquidity. Andrew stopped pacing and spun to face Mark. What about the Hamptons property? It's appraised at $8 million. It's leveraged at 6, Mark corrected. And it takes 90 days to close a sale, Andrew. We have 48 hours. The realization hit Andrew with brutal finality. The money he had been spending, the wine, the Wagyu, the $500 tip, was the last visible gasp of a dying empire. He had no cash reserve. Everything was tied up in slow-moving, illiquid, or over-leveraged assets. They timed this, Andrew whispered, looking over at Lily, who was standing silently by the window, watching the city lights. It's a common pressure tactic, Andrew, Mark sighed. They want us to panic and offer a quick settlement, something they can seize immediately.
I won't settle, Andrew roared, his voice echoing off the glass walls. I will not let those vultures take my life's work. We need a white knight, Mark. We need a loan. Call everyone. Call Robert. He was sitting right there. He saw the commitment. Mark looked uncomfortable. Robert and Sarah saw the letter, Andrew. They saw you fold under pressure. Robert is cautious. He won't lend you money now. He'll demand to review every single contract you hold. Andrew collapsed onto the leather sofa, the expensive material squeaking under his weight. He was defeated, not by the number, but by the public witnessing of his defeat. His entire self-worth was tied up in the admiration of men like Robert. So, what's the play, Mark? Andrew asked, his voice now thin and weak. What do we liquidate in 48 hours that covers $19.5 million? Mark opened the file he was holding. There is one thing, Andrew. It's quick, it's clean, and it's highly liquid, though it will hurt. Andrew stared at him, dread pooling in his stomach. What is it? The art collection, Mark said, looking pained. The 3 original American modernists. They are unencumbered. We could auction them privately, immediately. They are valued conservatively at $23 million. We could pull in the cash within 36 hours, maybe less if we accept a slight discount. Andrew stared at the wall where the most valuable painting hung, a vibrant, abstract canvas that he had bought during his first flush of true success. It wasn't just art, it was a trophy. It was proof that he had made it. It was the one piece of wealth he truly enjoyed. No, Andrew said immediately. No, that's non-negotiable. Andrew, Mark pleaded, this is not about what's negotiable. This is about staying afloat. If Bainbridge and Thorne seize your primary business assets, the whole structure collapses. This is the only way to meet the acceleration demand.
Lily finally walked away from the window and approached the sofa. She looked at her father, then at the painting. Dad, Lily said softly, the painting is just visibility. You said it yourself. Perception is reality. But right now, the reality is the dead notice. Sell the painting. Andrew looked from the worried face of his CFO to the calm, disappointed face of his daughter. The painting represented the last vestige of the man he thought he was. Selling it meant admitting that the man at the dinner table, the generous host, the philanthropic leader, was entirely gone. I won't, Andrew insisted, clinging to the last shred of his ego. Find something else, Mark. Anything else. Mark closed the file slowly. Andrew, I've run the numbers 100 times tonight. There is nothing else. This is it. Either we sell the art, or by Wednesday morning, Bainbridge and Bourne owns your company, your apartment, and everything you've spent the last decade building. The silence returned, heavier this time. It was not the silence of the restaurant, filled with noise and pretense. It was the cold, hard silence of finality. Andrew Walker, the millionaire who had thought he was doing great, was finally facing the true cost of his performance, realizing that the debt he had been avoiding was now demanding not just money, but his trophies. He had 36 hours to decide which was more important, his visible status or his actual financial survival. Andrew collapsed onto the leather sofa, the expensive material squeaking under his weight. He was defeated, not by the number, but by the public witnessing of his defeat. His entire self-worth was tied up in the admiration of men like Robert. So, what's the play, Mark? Andrew asked, his voice now thin and weak. What do we liquidate in 48 hours that covers 19.5 million? Mark opened the file he was holding. There is one thing, Andrew. It's quick, it's clean, and it's highly liquid, though it will hurt.
Andrew stared at him, dread pooling in his stomach. What is it? The art collection, Mark said, looking pained. The 3 original American modernists. They are unencumbered. We could auction them privately, immediately. They are valued conservatively at 23 million. We could pull in the cash within 36 hours, maybe less if we accept a slight discount. Andrew stared at the wall where the most valuable painting hung, a vibrant, abstract canvas that he had bought during his first flush of true success. It wasn't just art, it was a trophy. It was proof that he had made it. It was the one piece of wealth he truly enjoyed. No, Andrew said immediately. No, that's non-negotiable. Andrew, Mark pleaded, this is not about what's negotiable. This is about staying afloat. If Bainbridge and Thorne seize your primary business assets, the whole structure collapses. This is the only way to meet the acceleration demand. Lily finally walked away from the window and approached the sofa. She looked at her father, then at the painting. Dad, Lily said softly, the painting is just visibility. You said it yourself. Perception is reality. But right now, the reality is the debt notice. Sell the painting. Andrew looked from the worried face of his CFO to the calm, disappointed face of his daughter. The painting represented the last vestige of the man he thought he was. Selling it meant admitting that the man at the dinner table, the generous host, the philanthropic leader, was entirely gone. I won't, Andrew insisted, clinging to the last shred of his ego. Find something else, Mark. Anything else. Mark closed the file slowly. Andrew, I've run the numbers 100 times tonight. There is nothing else. This is it. Either we sell the art, or by Wednesday morning, Bainbridge and Thorne owns your company, your apartment, and everything you've spent the last decade building.
The silence returned, heavier this time. It was not the silence of the restaurant, filled with noise and pretense. It was the cold, hard silence of finality. Andrew Walker, the millionaire who had thought he was doing great, was finally facing the true cost of his performance, realizing that the debt he had been avoiding was now demanding not just money, but his trophies. He had 36 hours to decide which was more important, his visible status or his actual financial survival. He sat there for what felt like an hour, staring at the canvas. The painting, a swirling mass of blues and reds, usually made him feel powerful, a collector of beauty and success. Now, it just looked like a pile of cash he couldn't touch. Call Robert, Andrew suddenly ordered, lifting his head. His voice was desperate. Just try him. Tell him I need a short-term, high-interest bridge, anything to buy us a week. Mark sighed, pulling out his phone. He knew how this would go. He put the call on speakerphone, and after 2 rings, Robert answered, his voice groggy. Andrew, it's midnight. Is everything all right? Robert, I apologize for the hour, Andrew began, trying to sound like the confident man from the gala. Listen, that paperwork tonight, it's a hostile maneuver by a competitor trying to seize the Miami assets. I need a quick infusion of cash to stabilize the situation, a temporary loan secured against the Hamptons property. You saw tonight, I'm fully committed to this market. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Andrew held his breath. Andrew, Robert finally replied, his voice flat, devoid of the camaraderie they'd shared hours earlier. I saw the letterhead, Bainbridge and Thorne, right? That's not a competitor, Andrew. That's asset resolution. And I saw the total number too, even if you folded it quickly. Look, I'm sorry, but I can't get involved in a situation that volatile.
I need to review your entire portfolio before I can even consider a partnership, let alone a loan. Good luck, Andrew. The line went dead. Andrew stared at the phone. The finality of the rejection was absolute. His performance at the Metropolitan Room hadn't convinced Robert. It had merely provided an elegant setting for his public downfall. He looked at Mark, then at Lily. Lily's face held no surprise. The painting, Andrew croaked, defeated. He didn't look at the canvas again. Sell the damned painting, Mark. Get the money, now. Mark didn't hesitate.
I'm calling the private auction house. They have a network ready for exactly this kind of fire sale. The next morning, Wednesday, began before dawn. The massive penthouse, usually a sanctuary of quiet luxury, was filled with the anxious energy of impending financial surgery. At 7 a.m., 2 professional art handlers, wearing white gloves and carrying specialized crates, arrived. Andrew watched from the doorway of the living room as they carefully, reverently, took down the 3 most valuable pieces of his collection. The vibrant abstract painting that had anchored his living room for years came off the wall, leaving behind a sterile, pale rectangle of untouched paint, a ghost of his former success. Andrew felt a physical pang, a hollow ache where his pride used to reside. He hadn't just lost a painting, he had lost the story he told himself about his life. Mark spent the next 9 hours on the phone, negotiating with brokers and buyers who smelt blood in the water. They knew it was a forced sale. They knew the seller was desperate. The final price was good, but it was discounted by nearly $3 million for the speed and discretion required. By 4 p.m., 36 hours after the debt notice arrived before dessert, the wire transfer was confirmed. $20.2 million was in a secure escrow account, ready to pay the wolves at Bainbridge and Thorne.
Andrew sat at his massive, empty mahogany desk, watching the clock tick down. He was wearing the same suit from the previous night, now wrinkled and smelling faintly of stale panic. "It's done, Andrew," Mark said, walking into the office, looking exhausted but victorious. "We met the demand. The $19.5 million has been wired and accepted. We have confirmation that the acceleration notice is rescinded." Andrew nodded slowly. He had survived. He was still in control of his core business, battered and bruised, but alive. Before we get to the powerful conclusion of this story, let me know in the comments, what's the biggest financial mistake you've ever seen someone make? And if you haven't subscribed, do it now. We're building a community that talks about real money stories, not fake Instagram wealth. "And what's left, Mark?" Andrew asked, his voice low. "We have about $700,000 liquid after fees and penalties," Mark calculated. "But Andrew, we have to face reality. We had to sell the art to pay a bridge loan. That means we have zero liquidity left. We need to restructure, immediately. The Hamptons house goes on the market tomorrow. The driver, the yacht, the plane, all leased assets need to be terminated. The lifestyle ends today." Andrew stared out the window at the distant view of Central Park. The life he had built on appearance was gone. The visibility he craved had nearly killed him. "Mark," Andrew said, leaning back, the fight finally gone from his eyes, "make the cuts, all of them, and start negotiating with Robert. We'll sell him the Miami assets at a loss. We need stability, not growth." The performance was over. The curtain had fallen. Andrew Walker was no longer playing the millionaire. He was playing the debtor. Lily walked into the office, holding a mug of coffee for him. She didn't look triumphant or smug. She looked sad.
"I called the moving company," she said quietly. "I told them to start packing up some of the extra things. We don't need 5,000 square feet, Dad." Andrew looked at her, realizing that while he was trying to preserve his reputation, she was already planning their survival. "Thank you, Lily," he whispered. It was the most honest thing he had said all night. A week later, the financial world began to whisper. Andrew Walker had suddenly sold off 3 key assets. He claimed it was strategic optimization, but the speed and the discount spoke louder than his press releases. Robert and Sarah politely declined all further meetings, citing diverging strategic goals. Andrew's lavish lifestyle evaporated. The driver was gone. The penthouse was listed quietly. He was driving his own aging Mercedes sedan, and he was eating dinner at home. The day after the debt was paid, Andrew found a note from Lily on his desk. It wasn't about money or debt. It was a clipping from a local paper about a successful charity initiative. "The world needs leaders who step up," it read. Lily had underlined the words. Andrew understood. His true leadership would now be measured not by the size of his wallet, but by the size of his recovery. Meanwhile, across town, in a small, slightly cramped apartment in Brooklyn, Noah Green was having a much better week. The $500 Andrew Walker had thrown at him, the final, desperate flourish of a man trying to buy admiration, had been put to immediate practical use. Noah used $450 to pay off his overdue rent and buy a week's worth of groceries. The remaining $50 went toward a textbook he desperately needed for his night class. He stood in his kitchen on Friday evening, making a cheap but hearty spaghetti dinner. He had paid his bills, he was stable, he was surviving. He saw a headline flash across the cheap television screen. Billionaire Andrew Walker sells prized art collection in sudden market shift.
Noah paused, stirring the pasta sauce. He recognized the name. Andrew Walker, the man who complained about the timid cork. Noah smiled faintly. He knew the truth behind that sudden market shift. He knew it was the accelerated debt notice from Bainbridge and Thorne, the same kind of firm that had chased him over a few $1,000s in student loans. The difference was, Andrew Walker had played a high-stakes game of appearance, using visible spending to mask invisible ruin, and it had nearly cost him everything. Noah, on the other hand, was playing the long game, focused on real stability, earned dollar by dollar. Noah had received $500 as a byproduct of Andrew's desperation. It was a strange, accidental redistribution of wealth, the millionaire's final involuntary act of charity. He turned off the stove, poured the pasta onto a plate, and sat down to eat. He picked up his new textbook, smelling the fresh ink of the pages. Andrew Walker was now fighting for his financial life in a glass tower, stripped of his trophies and his pride. Noah Green was sitting in his small apartment, debt-free for the moment, and finally able to focus on his education. The dinner at the Metropolitan Room had been a performance of spectacular wealth, but before the dessert arrived, the debt had exposed the truth. For Andrew Walker, the cost of that night was millions and the loss of his identity. For Noah Green, it was measured in stability and a new textbook. The world kept turning, indifferent to the rise and fall of millionaires. Noah ate his dinner, looking forward to his class the next day. So what's the lesson here? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If this story made you think differently about wealth and success, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories that pull back the curtain on money, ego, and what really matters. See you in the next one.
He had learned a valuable lesson from the man at table 14. True success isn't about how much you spend in public, it's about what you keep hidden in reserve. And sometimes the most expensive performance is the one that buys you nothing but a clean slate for someone else.